you. So so you could say that they were, yeah, they were clueless, but it was because they were blindsided by a sort of threat they had never had to confront before in their entire history.
Dr. Graff, is there anything that stands out about Qing's military power and prowess? The last empire of China, right?
Yeah, and certainly arguably the most successful, because it was the of all of China's imperial dynasties, because it was the Qing that finally solved the problem of the nomads.
Ah,
And it was because the Qing came from outside. They
they were
came
Manchurians.
they came in, yes, with an army that was in part a steppe army of mounted archers. But to that, they melded other elements, including artillery. So they had, up to date artillery, much of it kind of served by Han Chinese artillerymen that they brought into their system, and they had plus a steppe cavalry force. So they were they were kind of very good at drawing upon the various talents and capabilities of various peoples in East Asia that they brought under their control, to further extend their dominance.
Did they solve their Tibetan headache?
They did, yeah. And in fact, the Tibetan headache had, in fact, largely dissolved much earlier due to changes in Tibet. So that the Tibetan state, that had been such a threat to the Tang, really deteriorated and fell apart in the mid ninth century.
I see.
And kind of thereafter, what followed in Tibet was not so imperialistic or militarily aggressive. And of course, Tibet was conquered by the Mongols, dominated by the Mongols, in their heyday, in the heyday of the Yuan dynasty in
Yeah.
China. And then, really during the Ming period, nothing arose in Tibet to threaten China seriously.
Oh, so the Qing really didn't need to deal
Yeah,
with them.
but then the Qing moved on in and did establish their dominance over Tibet. So Tibet was in fact incorporated into the Qing Empire, and a Qing resident was installed in Lhasa in the early 17th, or excuse me, 18th century. I'm sorry, to keep early 1700s, to keep an eye on the Dalai Lama.
Um, so the Qing dynasty conquers Tibet and many other regions. Its borders resemble very much modern China's borders. It's the largest borders territory in China's several
Actually,
thousand year history, right?
actually larger. The Qing
Larger.
the Qing at its height exceeded today's People's Republic of China, mainly because of Mongolia. What is now the independent nation of Mongolia was part of the Qing Empire. And
When did China lose Mongolia?
Mongolia was basically after the 1911 revolution in China, due
I
to,
see.
mainly due to the Tsarist Russian interference
I see. And it
so,
became sort of a buffer between the two
right,
countries.
right. But it was basically Russian power and influence, that kept China from reabsorbing Mongolia. And in fact, Mao asked, Stalin more than once to give him Mongolia back, and the story is Stalin just laughed.
As I'm laughing now, it's like, yeah, I'll give you back. It- with respect to the Qing, I want to ask you about a specific period. Let's go to the first Opium War. This really amazes me. Um, we all know the story. The British India Company forces China to buy opium from India. I'm really condensing it here, simplifying it, and the British government finally gets involved because British goods i.e., opium, are being confiscated by the Chinese government. Anyway, um, what's fascinating is how, and I hope my words aren't offensive, but I can't think of another word, how clueless the Qing military elite were regarding British military capability. Is that an accurate or somewhat accurate description?
Yeah, it is, but it it's not because China's ruling elites were stupid. I would
No, I
not
didn't say it's stupid. I just used the word clueless. They were really shocked that
and but
they
if you
thought this is a victory.
but how much Britain's superiority was the product of the Industrial Revolution, which was a
Yeah.
very recent development. And this is perhaps one place where China's famous long-term thinking did them a disservice, because they were thinking in terms of what they had been used to, not just for the centuries that the Qing had been in power, but also for millennia. That the sea had never been a threat. The threat
Oh,
always came from the inland frontiers,
that's true. That's true.
and the Qing were still by and large oriented in that direction. They were kind of much more concerned about their dealings with Tsarist Russia rather than the British.
And to the extent that the sea was a threat, it was more like Japanese pirates that were a nuisance.
Yeah,
They were not like a naval power.
Japanese pirates were even largely a thing of the past. But by the time that the Qing dynasty was being established,
That's true. Yeah.
certainly by 1700, the Japanese pirates were no longer an issue, and the Tokugawa shogunate had things sewed up pretty tightly in Japan. Um, but yeah, the to the extent that Westerners had been poking around the coasts of China, they had, yeah, the Portuguese showed up, engaged in a little bit of piracy, and then were bought off very easily by being given a toehold in Macau,
Yeah.
where they existed on sufferance, because the Chinese found that arrangement convenient. Right, they worked that out with the Ming Dynasty, and the Qing Dynasty continued it, and then you had the Dutch East India Company, right, moving into Taiwan, and then they got expelled from Taiwan by Chinese pirates. So
Oh,
Zhang
wow.
Shengong's pirate fleet expels the Dutch in roughly 1660s. And then the Qing dynasty, then in the early 1680s, conquers Taiwan, incorporates it into the Qing Empire, but with a little bit of assistance from the Dutch, who are so they're not exactly worried about Westerners. Westerners show up with few ships, smallish ships, wanting to trade. And they're people who had not proved to be a major military threat before, and the coast is not where the threats come from, historically speaking.
That's really interesting.
So so you could say that they were, yeah, they were clueless, but it was because they were blindsided by a sort of threat they had never had to confront before in their entire history.
And were British ships just leaps and bounds
Uh,
advanced as far as technology is concerned, or?
some were, but if you're thinking about, say, even a European wooden sailing ship, say
Uh-huh.
a frigate or ship of the line of the early 19th century, was certainly far superior in its capabilities, both kind of firepower and kind of maneuverability, to Qing warships at that time. But the but what was really leaps and bounds ahead were vessels such as the HMS Nemesis, which was a steam propelled vessel, very very low draft, or shallow draft, excuse me, that could kind of operate, was very maneuverable, could easily operate in China's coastal waters and up its river estuaries, and also packed a lot of firepower.
And Chinese couldn't compete with that.
Fire explosive shells and so forth. So there's one famous print of an engagement during the Opium War. You see it in a lot of textbooks, even on the cover of some books these days, that shows Chinese warships just exploding after by the just going sky high after being hit by a shell from the nemesis.
Let's take a break here. Stay with me and Dr. Graff as we get into the perspective.